Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing what I believe is actually only my second review of a TV show. I haven't done a TV show review in a while. I did one on Kenobi a couple years back, but I am back with another TV show review, and this time it is for the second season of Netflix's live adaptation of The Last Airbender. Let's talk about it. So I was actually embarrassingly late to watching the original anime Last Airbender series. I didn't have cable at home, and it wasn't a show that particularly interested my family when I was younger, so I actually never got around to watching it until I was in my 20s, actually 5 years ago. In 2020 was the first time I ever watched this series from front to back. Now, I do remember maybe a couple years before 2020, when I was a little bit younger as a teenager, I had maybe started it a little bit, but I think I was at that stage where I thought that I was too cool for a kid's show or something like that. But thankfully, as I got older, I started opening my mind up more to watching things like that, and I'm so glad I did, because this is genuinely, and I know so many people have said this, so I don't think this is a particularly hot take at all, this is one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. Not just one of the best children's TV shows, it is generally one of the best TV shows of all time. I can see that it's definitely meant to appeal to kids, but I also think, like any good TV adaptation or TV medium that is meant for kids, it also has plenty of content that it can appeal to adults. I think there's plenty of really adult themes in the show, talking about the horrors of war in particular, as well as internal change that can happen when you focus on yourself and really on improving yourself, as well as really deep friendships in the show. I think that the show also does a good job of maturing as it gets older and as the kids age. I mean, it's just a really good adaptation in general. Obviously, gorgeous animation, maybe one of the best animated shows I've ever seen, with just some beautiful fight scenes. I love the characters in the show, so many great ones. My favorite is Katara, which I know is a lot of other people's favorites. I also love Zuko and Iroh. I think those are probably my top three, but I mean, pretty much all the characters in the show are great. All of them have their own great personalities. Maybe it's not a pitch-perfect show from front to back. Season 1 does have some flaws in it, and I even think Season 3 has some slight weak points in it. But I do think Season 2 of the show, the one emphasizing on Earth, is maybe one of the best seasons of television I've seen in general. I just love the arc that season goes on in particular. I love the political plot that goes on in the ending parts of the show, in particular with Ba Sing Se. It's just really interesting to watch and interesting to see the kids having to deal with it. Lots of complex stuff going on in this season, as well as we get to see Aang being challenged with losing Appa and having to deal with anger and grief, and Katara having to deal with her own challenges of becoming a bigger leader of the group and really just realizing her role within the group. I like that Sokka gets to come up with more plans, and of course, the incorporation of Toph really lifts the show up to new heights. I think she is a great addition to the group. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the live-action adaptation of this. Of course, I think a lot of fans have, and this is unfortunate, so many people begging for live-action adaptations of things that don't need them. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, and I feel like we were already proven that this didn't need to happen with M. Night Shyamalan's absolutely disastrous adaptation of Avatar many years ago. It's been over a decade at this point. I still remember how horrible it was, and that I actually saw that before I ever saw the show, so it was all the more confusing to me. And watching it after I watched the show, I could see why new fans would be confused by it with how disastrously it adapted the source material. But yeah, I just didn't see the need for a live-action adaptation. And while I did initially have some hopes when this was announced, especially with the creators initially talking about how they wanted to be more accurate to the show, they were going to be more adapting more race-accurate people for one thing, which was already a plus, but they were also going to try to be more true to the plot elements in the show. But then as the show started to come out, as it was getting ready to come out, there started being more and more things coming out that were concerning to me, such as the fact that the show wanted to take away some of the problematic elements of the original that weren't really problematic in the first place, like Sokka's sexism in season 1 that he learns to overcome and that the show doesn't ever fully endorse. Or the fact that the Water Tribe doesn't like to have girls learning waterbending, which is once again something that the show overcomes and shows is bad. Or that they don't like the quote-unquote side quests that the show goes on and that they want Aang to focus on just beating the Fire Lord. Whereas the side quests were a part of the biggest charm of the show, and they showed Aang's character of being very childish and very adventurous. And also, it wasn't like the side quests were inconsequential. A lot of them really revealed important things about how to defeat the Fire Lord or important plot elements. And unfortunately, season 1 did have some of those worries confirmed. Now, it wasn't an entirely worthless adaptation by any means. I did think that the actor who was playing Aang, I thought that Gordon Cormier was a pretty good Aang, although they played him maybe a little bit too seriously in certain places. Not to the point where it felt like a total betrayal of the character, but it did feel like he was maybe more serious than he was a childish jokester in the original, which is what he was meant to be. And I also felt that Katara was a little dull. Sokka it didn't really feel like the character I'd come to know. And Zuko and Iroh both felt kind of different too, although there were some okay things in there as well. But there were a lot of changes I already had problems with in season 1. But it still ended up, at the end of the day, being an okay-ish show, with plenty of flaws. Trust me, plenty of flaws. But this did leave me worried for where Season 2 was going to go, because Season 2 is a far more complex story than Season 1, and one where I think, whereas you could maybe take out some of the side quest elements of Season 1 and make the show work fine, I think in season 2 a lot of the side quest stories are actually rather important to where the story goes, so I was worried about what ones they were going to take out, as well as how the characters were going to fare. And what did we get out of it? Well, let's discuss. Now, I do want to start out with the positives of this show, because it's not like it's entirely devoid of them, although I think the positives are in very small number in this season, as compared to season 1, where I could offer a decent amount of positives. In this one, there's far less for me to commend. I do think one of the things I feel unequivocally positive about, without really many qualms at all, is Maya Chek as Toph. I think that she is easily the best element of this show. I mean, it's sort of hard to mess up Toph. I feel like she's maybe one of the easiest characters in the show to develop, just an all-around blind badass who is able to take advantage of her blindness in very clever ways to defeat her foes, because they so heavily underestimate her, and she's just sort of a snide character who loves to mess with people and who loves to be tough on people, because that's sort of her love language, is showing tough love, I guess you could say. And, of course, she's also having to deal with the conflict of her family, viewing her as fragile just because of her blindness. I think it's about as close to a one-to-one adaptation as the show has gotten. There are some small dialogue flaws that I will discuss when we get into critiques, but for the most part, there's not many issues. I think Maya Chek plays this character very well. She's very expressive in the role. She's clearly having a lot of fun with it. I just really liked following along with her. I also thought her character arc was generally really good. I actually think one thing this show did better than the original show, and this is one of the only times I'll say that the adaptation has an advantage, is that they emphasize even more on her relationship with her parents. We get to see her talk about that more, and talk about how it was tough for her to be viewed as someone who was weak and fragile, and who was not estimated as correctly as she should be. I like that we get to see more of her talking about that, and I think it works. I also don't mind the change that they make with her parents. They make them a bit more evil in this one, as it is confirmed that they are developing weapons for the Fire Nation, but it does sort of fit in with the idea that they're going for with the Earth Nation, with some people secretly building political machinations to work with the Fire Nation or work to something to their advantage that would give them a leg up. So it does make sense that this would be happening, and I do think it works and makes Toph's parents have a little bit more of an interesting place in the world of this show. Like I said, think Maya does great in the role, and I think she was easily one of the most enjoyable things, if not the most enjoyable thing about the show. Yeah, not many critiques to give about that in particular. I think Toph was a great addition to the show, and I think they did a really good job with her. I know there's a lot of controversy around the casting of Ian Ousley. I won't get into that too much, but I do generally think that he has improved in his performance as Sokka this season. His voice is actually one of the few that actually sounds like the character from the original show. There's one other that is like this, but he's one of the few that does sound like the original character in the show, so that does help with this adaptation a lot. I also do like that there's a bit more of a development of his relationship with Suki in the season, whereas in the original show, they didn't get to interact much beyond maybe 2 or 3 episodes, and it was very short interactions. I do like that Sokka gets to talk more about his insecurities with losing her, especially as he has lost Yue in the last season, and we get to see a little bit more vulnerability from him in that regard. I think he has a lot more funny scenes in this one as well, although there weren't as many that made me laugh out loud as I wish there would be, because Sokka is so funny in the original show. This was the case in Season 1 as well, but I think Season 2 continues the trajectory of having decent action sequences, although I still don't think they can really compare to the visual feast that we get in the animated version. The fight scenes aren't nearly as good, but they are still relatively cool for what we get, and it's not like they look super dull or anything. I do think they're fun. I also do think that the last episode of Season 2 is actually pretty decent, especially when you compare it to the rest of the show. Another positive that I have to give it, and this one is one that surprised me that I had as much to say about as I did, but it would be Shin Han as Long Feng. This was one of the most surprising changes in the show, but I think it actually worked to the show's advantage, how they portrayed Long Feng in the show. It is a very different interpretation to the one we get in the original, but I do think it's an interesting one. I think it was a cool idea to have Aang initially trust him. It sort of works with how Long Feng is trying to create a propagandized version of Ba Sing Se, where people are just living in safety and denial of a war outside of them. And I almost like the sort of mentor-mentee relationship that they have initially. It was a bit odd, a bit weird to get used to at first, but it did work with this interpretation of the character, and it actually made his betrayal hit a little bit more. I do like how devious and evil he is in the original, how obviously evil he is, but this more nuanced portrayal actually works for him, and it actually shows him becoming failed and deceived himself, because even though he tries to create this sense of false safety, even when he's trying to do that, the Fire Nation still gets him, and he still has to break free of his delusions no matter what. So I thought that was a cool way to end off his character. And if they had him a little bit more in Season 3, I wouldn't necessarily mind, although I don't think we're going to see him again. And finally, my last positive, and I have a lot of critiques about this character otherwise, but there is one choice with Iroh that I liked, and that choice was emphasizing more on the guilt, as well as, I would say, PTSD that he has on the actions that he took in Ba Sing Se. Whereas in the original show, Iroh had pretty much recovered from any feelings of guilt he had on Ba Sing Se. He acknowledges the guilt he has for his actions in the show, but not very much. In this one, he has to reckon with them far more, and he hasn't recovered from them, as well as feeling far more devastated by the loss of his son still. He still feels that, even in his old age. And I think it was interesting to watch him deal with that while he was in Ba Sing Se, particularly in a pretty poignant scene where he watches an Earth Nation commoner putting up the names of the people who had died in Ba Sing Se and saying that their names should not be forgotten, and that immediate tinge and wave of guilt crashes over him as a person who led the siege on Ba Sing Se. So I did think that worked, but sadly there's a lot more about Iroh that doesn't work, and sadly there's a lot about this show in general that doesn't work. And now we get into the bigger portion of this video, which is my many critiques of it. I'm going to try to divide this into little sections on the video, so if you want to jump around and see my thoughts on different things, I'll try to have timestamps in them. I've tried to keep my thoughts fairly organized, because otherwise this could very easily turn into a rant where I jump from one thing to another. So I've organized it into characters as well as certain plot points. And we're going to start with what I think might be the biggest betrayal in the show, is Aang himself. Now, Aang is an iconic character. I think it's hard to deny that he is the face of the show in many ways. Many people view him as one of the most important child characters of all time, so I think it is pretty important to develop him well. And this show utterly betrays his character, in my opinion, in this season. In season 1, I'd already said that he was maybe a little bit too serious, but I think that this season makes a far bigger crime of severely misunderstanding the main character. In this one, he is even more serious, almost to a fault, and he is angry a lot of the time in this season too. Now, there are points in season 2 where Aang gets angry, and I think those points are important because they show a different side of Aang. In the show, it's actually meant to surprise us when Aang becomes so angry because we see him so often as this childish and very happy-go-lucky guy. But then we remember that he does have a lot of backing trauma around him of losing the Fire Nation, and when he loses Appa, his last connection to the Fire Nation, he becomes angry because of that, and understandably so. But in this show, because they make him serious and angry all the time, it actually doesn't really work when he does become angry when he's supposed to. It's just such a weird choice. I don't know why they did that, except to maybe make this show more gritty and realistic, which I hate as an adaptational choice. I think it's a terrible one that this show makes time and time again, and the show suffers for it in more ways than one. Gordon Cormier is putting on a weaker performance here, but I don't think it's entirely to his fault. In fact, a lot of it is not his fault because of how he is written. He is written to be a much more serious and much more in-tune character with not having many moments where he gets to have fun or gets to joke around with his friends. And, I mean, this is so perplexing because I've watched behind the scenes of the Avatar show, and Gordon Cormier in particular, in real life, seems like he basically is Aang. He is a bit of a jokester, and he loves to have fun, so I'm not sure why they didn't incorporate this into the show at all. I also think that they give Aang an entirely unnecessary character arc of needing to trust his friends. In season 1 of the show, Aang had already had a moment where he was supposed to lose trust in his friends, but in this one, they give him a season-long arc of having to overcome this, and I just don't understand why they needed to do this. It doesn't make any sense for his character's personality that he would need to deal with this at all, and it leads to some very silly moments of anger at his friends that just don't feel remotely needed. Also, as I was just talking about and alluding to earlier, his whole arc of losing Appa from the original show is given a way too easy solution. He loses him at the end of one episode, and he's able to find him pretty quickly in the next episode. He doesn't even have to deal with his very real grief and anger at losing Appa, whereas this was a very important part of the original show, of him having to deal with a very real and present grief and having to realize how he can deal with it, but then also the happiness when he does finally find Appa and reunite with his last connection to the air nomads. It's a very powerful moment, and it feels entirely wasted here. I just hated that they did away with this arc because it was one of the best parts of season 2, without a doubt, in my opinion, of the original show. Also, I'm just perplexed as to why they took this part out, but not having to learn chakras from Guru Paitik for controlling the Avatar state is entirely omitted from the show. I don't understand why this is omitted at all. It is a very key part for Aang having to learn how to use the Avatar state, and it's just entirely forgotten here. It treats the Avatar state as just a power-up more than anything else, rather than an important thing that Aang needs to master, and I just don't get it. It was a very weird choice. And anytime he is angry in the show, just feels forced and hackneyed. It just continues to do so, and I'm going to give an example of that when we get into maybe some more specific plot points that I dislike. But yeah, Aang is one of the biggest problems of the show, and that is truly unfortunate. Next up, let's talk about who is my favorite character in the original show, Katara. And unfortunately, they do this character a lot of injustice too. It might not be quite as egregious as Aang, but it is still pretty bad in places. Now, Guillaume Wantio is actually really improving here with her performance, whereas I felt she was a little bit bored and uninvested in season 1, and once again, to be fair to her, the scriptwriters didn't give her much to do in season 1. I do think she improves here, but she still has to deal with a not very well written character at all. I just don't see how the Katara we get here is in any way reminiscent of the Katara we get in the original show. I think the one big positive about her character is that she has some really cool fight sequences. Katara has some really cool sequences where she uses her waterbending to her full advantage, and the show takes advantage of making those scenes visually really cool. But all the other parts of Katara are really lost here. She no longer really feels like the leader of the group. I think that is essentially what she is in the show. She's a very important leader who really cares for and loves on the other members of the Aang group. She's key to keeping them together in the, of course, omitted Appa Lost arc that is in the original show. And I just don't understand why that was taken out here. Instead, she feels far more like a side character where she's doing stuff on her own for no reason. In particular, a weird betrayal of her is her even considering at one point to join the Kyoshi warriors when Suki asks her to do so. I didn't feel like there was any part of her character that should consider doing this, because her important character trait is supposed to be that she is focused on protecting the Avatar and on helping him in his mission. And the solo sequences with her, I mean, they essentially boil down to poorly written fan fiction. This is where we get into stuff that they add into the show that just doesn't work at all. And there's a lot of added stuff with Katara in particular this season that I just did not like in any way, shape, or form. And they introduced something that was only done in one episode in season 3. They introduced her as the Painted Lady here. This is already really weird because the Painted Lady is supposed to be a river spirit, and there is no river anywhere near Ba Sing Se where this happens, so I don't know why they introduce her other than just to have these cool aura moments, I suppose. It's still just very perplexing why it happens. And I just didn't care for it at all. It felt like an illogical writing choice, and it doesn't really bring the group any closer to their goal. And for a show that is claiming it is done with side quests, man, it feels like everything with Katara in this season, particularly in Ba Sing Se, is a side quest. She just feels inconsequential in a lot of parts of the show, which is a real shame. Her relationship with Aang is also just very messily developed. There are parts where they'll give you some hints that they're supposed to be romantically involved by the end of the show, but then there are some other parts where they are sniping at each other. It actually made me angry in these parts where I saw them so viciously arguing with one another, because that is so uncharacteristic of these two characters who clearly love and care for one another in the original show, and you just don't get many of those indications here. I mean, it's hard for me to be convinced that this version of these characters will have any chance of being together by the end. Maybe the show thinks they're doing something right, but it just doesn't feel like the Katara and Aang relationship that felt so affectionate in the original show and was one of the best parts of the show. I just love how they're developed in the original, and here it just feels like a total betrayal of what made them work so well. Next up, let's talk about Zuko. This is another tough one that I really just cannot stand what they did with this character, and it's a shame because Dallas Liu is putting on one of the best performances of the show, but this character feels entirely bastardized. I don't recognize Zuko at all here, I'm sorry to say. He goes on his own, literally in the first episode of the season, way too quickly. And there are direct changes to his arc alone that just irritate me to no end as well. First of all, he steals from a pregnant woman when he goes alone, which is something that he just would not do. Not my Zuko. I don't think Zuko would do that. And creators also have him firebend for the first time in the Earth Nation when he is confronting Aang, as opposed to his Zuko alone arc in the original show, where he was firebending to protect a child who was going to get abducted by cruel earthbenders who were taking control of this small, impoverished town. It feels like a total betrayal of his alone arc, whereas in the original, his alone arc was very important to him becoming an eventually better person by the end of the show. I just feel like they totally butchered it here, and that was a bad choice for where this character is meant to go. There's a scene like in the original where Iroh teaches Zuko about the elements, but unlike in the original show, they don't really give a reason for this happening besides Zuko learning how to bend lightning. But that is not the reason that Iroh teaches him about the elements in the original show. He teaches them about the elements because he wants Zuko to resolve the turmoil within himself. And that leads to the biggest problem with Zuko in the show, is that they don't really emphasize on his inner turmoil at all, outside of some very last-minute moments in the next to last episode that just feel like they come out of nowhere. I wouldn't blame fans of the new show if they got confused by Zuko suddenly turning into a good guy in season 3, because it is so minimally talked about in this season. And because of how many times in the show that Zuko makes more evil choices, such as telling Iroh for whatever reason that he's not his father, or robbing from a pregnant woman, or using his firebending powers for the first time to capture or try and capture the Avatar, because he makes those more evil choices, his change in the second half of the show doesn't make that much sense, and it feels half-hearted and way too quick. I also don't get the need for the emphasis on his blue spirit persona either. And then that leads to the insufferable fanfiction moment in here where Zuko and Katara meet to protect reformed Fire Nation soldiers as the Blue Prince and the Painted Lady. It is another added moment that is just so silly and ridiculous, and it just felt like it was another moment meant to be added here for aura points or whatever. It was so stupid, so unneeded, and I just couldn't stand it. It was just very silly. And yeah, with the inner turmoil, as I was saying, it really de-emphasizes the point where Zuko goes on that internal change. The fever moment is brief, where he actually physically gets ill because he's having to make a decision of whether to turn good or embrace his destiny to capture the Avatar. It also feels like Iroh has little impact on Zuko in changing him, which is an unfortunate change as well. I don't have as much to say on Azula. There are some things that they do with her that are fine, but she still doesn't feel like nearly the level of cool villain prowess that she has in the original show. I do have to give compliments to Elizabeth Yu. I think she does a good replication of Azula's iconic voice in particular, and I think she does prove herself in this show to be pretty cool in some parts. But her menace and cunning just feel greatly reduced. I mean, one example of this is how she encourages, for an example, Ty Lee to join her by basically putting her in life in danger when she is performing at the circus, because Ty Lee tells her she'd rather stay with the circus. And instead, they just have Ty Lee and May already being with her, and she has them fight one another to the death to prove their loyalty. It's a little weird because Azula is not active in any way, and it just felt like a weird choice for her at this point in the show. I just don't understand what that would accomplish. Another example of this is in the way that she takes over Ba Sing Se. We get no moment where we see her coming up with a plan to get the Dai Li on her side, which was a really cool part of the original show. She had to use her cunning with the Dai Li to get them on her side, and she also had to show them that she was a powerful and imposing leader, which she does. And eventually, the Dai Li bow to her just because they see how incredible of a leader and confident of a leader she is. But through this, she just uses violence to get what she wants at any point, which feels a little reductive. I just like that she had to use her wits in the original before turning violent eventually. And finally, yeah, while I liked some parts of Iroh, overall, I don't really like his character that much either, besides the sort of PTSD that he has to deal with. And while I do like his arc of dealing with guilt over his actions in the war, it feels like this character is just someone else overall. He does not really mentor Zuko outside of one scene. His character, because of what he's dealing with, seems to be in no place to teach Zuko anything, whereas this was one of the most important parts of Iroh in the original show, was his mentorship and how he taught not just Zuko, but also had interactions with Toph and Aang, and taught them how to improve themselves and how to develop themselves. He doesn't even try to keep a distant watch on Zuko while Zuko is alone. He just sort of lets him be, which is very weird because Iroh has expressed that he sees Zuko as a son, and yet we don't see much indication of that in the show at all. He initially also doesn't want to go into Ba Sing Se with Zuko due to past trauma. This feels like a total betrayal of Iroh as someone who deeply cares about Zuko in the original show. I just do not get why they incorporated this part. It just felt ridiculous for Zuko to have to force him to go to Ba Sing Se with him. And the relationship between the two feels incredibly de-emphasized of its importance. They just tell one another they care about each other rather than really showing it too often. And it's weird as well to get him only introduced into the White Lotus. He's not already a very high ranking member like in the original show. Once again, feels like this show just destroys Iroh of his amazing qualities that he had. He's not a mentor. He's not a powerful elder. He's not a wise individual who knows more than the people around him. I just don't feel like this is Iroh at all, and I think if you do think that this is a good adaptation, then you are being willfully ignorant. No sense of humor or fun is to be had with this character, whereas he is one of the funniest in the original show. Yeah, I just don't see how this is Iroh at all, and I just didn't really like his character much besides the one cool plot point with his PTSD that he had. Now that I've talked about characters, let's just get into some slight other problems, and I'm gonna try not to dwell on these things too much because this video is already running long enough, but other extra problems include the show is telling you things unnecessarily through laughable dialogue, such as Toph saying, "I'm Toph and I invented metal bending," as if the show isn't already showing her doing that, or when Azula says, "Fetch the fail son." Yes, we know that Zuko has failed in his duties to capture the Avatar. We don't need this told to us. Another big mistake, making the library be in the spirit world. Just a weird one. It puts the group in unnecessary danger, and it's very convenient that no one finds them in a place where they're supposed to have a handler at all times. And they could easily be killed while they're all there. I also don't know why they brought Jet along with them to the library. It's a weird choice as he offers little to being in the library. And it's just sort of strange the interactions that people have with past avatars in the spirit world, and particularly funny that Kyoshi has to ask where Aang is, as if Aang is not the individual who talks to the past avatars. Just a weird one that I just don't know why they did that. I think it's more cool to have Jet in the Dai Li arc where he is able to see how the Dai Li and Long Feng keep control of the No War and Ba Sing Se narrative, and he gets brainwashed eventually as a result. And speaking of that narrative, the political machinations happening on Ba Sing Se are heavily de-emphasized. There's no mention of brainwashing outside of the last episode, whereas this was a pretty important plot point to showing how Long Feng was keeping control in the original. It makes less sense because of this why people aren't questioning things about the narrative that's going on. And the more looming presence of the Fire Nation is also heavily de-emphasized on. We don't see any Fire Nation individuals consistently pursuing the Avatar and friends, unlike in the show, where it sometimes even gets hard for them to be in the air. They have to take down a Fire Nation drill in the original show as well, representing how the Fire Nation is already trying to infiltrate Ba Sing Se. But there's no mention of this in the show. In fact, we aren't really shown if the Fire Nation is doing much of anything at all, so it becomes sort of random when they suddenly infiltrate Ba Sing Se as a militia force in the very last episode. This next one is one of the most egregious in my opinion, and it has to do with the whole losing Appa arc, but Katara not taking Aang out of the Avatar state when he's angry about losing Appa feels like a wildly missed opportunity. It shows just how powerful their connection is, that Katara could take Aang out of a state where he is at his most powerful and yet easily kill her if he wanted to, but she is able to reach through that and see him for who he is. That just adds more to my thoughts that this key relationship in this show has pathetic development here. It's just inexcusable. I just do not understand why they do this. And finally, this is another bad one, and this one, it just amazes me that they included this the more I think about it. Aang and friends having a very forced falling out in the next to last episode is entirely unnecessary. All of them get angry at each other for reasons that are ridiculous, and Aang in particular is completely out of character in how angry he is. It gets to the point where he just literally pushes everyone away. Everyone leaves the house angry at him. And it's understandable why they would be angry at him because of the things that he is saying, but it just doesn't feel like something that the original Aang would do. It feels like, once again, another portrayal of his character. This was a very silly scene that could have been remedied if they were instead replaced with the far better arcs of the tension that the group had when they were trying to escape Azula as well in the desert. It wasn't like the characters were always getting along in the original show, but the arguments weren't things that could be friendship ending or have them separate from one another. I like that they still had to keep together and work together in the original show despite their differences. Whereas in this one, they just sort of walk away from each other and then have this very quick reuniting and forgiving of one another that feels way too quick. Just like everything in the show that moves way too quick. So yeah, those were my thoughts on Season 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Not very positive, as you can see. If I had a rating I could give this show, it would be a 1.5 out of 5 stars, but what were your thoughts on the show? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.